Hi everyone, let's start with chapter number 4, which is your ethics and acceptance chapter. Now, this is a very important chapter. Till now, whatever we did was slightly important, like chapter 1, chapter 2 was important from your base perspective, chapter 3, corporate governance, was important from your little bit of OTQ's perspective as well. But ethics and acceptance is one of the major areas of your syllabus, which is going to be tested in your knowledge based questions in your section B. It is going to be tested in your OTQs, and it is also be tested in your case studies as well. So this is an area of your syllabus which is really very important. It will account for at least 10 to 15% of the entire paper, even more than that sometimes, but at least this percentage is there. And this again is a topic which is not only relevant or important from your AA syllabus perspective. This is equally important from your AAA syllabus perspective, your SBR syllabus perspective, and you have already gotten a hint of this in your knowledge level if you have given in BT, in I think FA also, a little bit, not too much. You know the basics of the ethics that we're going to discuss in this particular chapter, but I really want to cover each and everything in very detail since this is one of the major important chapters of your syllabus. So let's start by first understanding what is ethics, what is acceptance, and then we'll go ahead. So if I first of all, like I always do, I always relate you to a real life case scenario. So think of yourself like when you as a human being, you have some norms, some rules, some ethics in you, like I won't lie to my parents, I will be very honest. I will not cheat anybody. I will not say bad words to anyone. These are some of the principles that you follow all time, right? So when in your real life you have certain principles, you also you can when you have certain principles in certain case scenarios, in certain situations, there are situations wherein these principles get affected or impacted, or you might not be able to follow these. For example, you are a very trustworthy, or for example, you always say truth, okay, no matter what. You tell your parents every single thing. But now some situation came and your friend said ki chalo, let's go to the bar, or let's go and hang out or something, and your parents said no, you cannot go, but you really want to go because you're exhausted from work, from studies, etc. So what you do, your friends say you can lie also to your parents, please lie and let's come, let's, it is a one time opportunity, etc. So because that is an external party threat to your principle was that you won't lie, but your friend came and persuaded you, they persuaded you that hey, listen, let's go. So that is a threat to your principles, right? Your principle was about truthfulness, and now that is in impact, that is getting impacted, or that is in a threatful situation basically, right? So that is a threat, and then you think, okay, let me not lie to my parents, I will put a safeguard to it. I will not lie, but I will tell my parents, I will explain, or I will try to explain to them that please let me go, this is the last, and then my friends are here and I want to enjoy and I'm tired of the work, etc, etc. So you are, you're not lying, you're not, you are safeguarding your principle from the threat of your friend, right? So this is a real life case scenario. Now put this scenario in the term of the audit. You know that audit is a professional body, and this is what we do in our professional world. And when in our personal lives we can have some ethics, we can have some principles, similarly for the auditor, they also have some principles, some ethics in place, so that there are no malpractices happening, right? So this is what this chapter is all about. We are going to firstly discuss a framework, we are going to discuss the threats, safeguards, and principles. Of course, these three are the major things, and then there are smaller little more topics that we're going to discuss in this particular chapter. All right, so this was an overview. Let me take you to the slides that I've made for you. Yeah, so these slides, guys, these are available on the portal, so you will be able to check out these slides. So you don't have to, please, when you are watching the lectures, concentrate on the concepts. I understand that you want to make some notes, but these notes, whatever I'm sharing with you here, these all are available already to you. So either what you can do is, you can, before you start with the class, you can print these notes, and then you can probably just annotate on them, so that whatever you want to add on something that I'm explaining to you right now, you can do that. But your main concentration right now should be on the concept, right? Okay, let's start first of all. So ISB. So in the previous chapter, in the second chapter regarding rules and regulations, I told you about ISBA, I told you about IFAC, I told you about ACCA, that these are the governing bodies. Now, as I mentioned, that these are the people who follow and who make. So make and follow the ethics, the rules, the regulations. So these people have made a conceptual framework. Yeah, conceptual framework. Like in our real life also, we have a set of rules and regulations. So here also we have conceptual framework, just like, for example, your Bible, for example, the Constitution of India, that is also like a framework within which there are numerous different aspects to it. Similarly, there's a conceptual framework in regards to the ISBA, who have made this and who actually utilize or follow these principles, follow whatever is mentioned in the framework, right? So the conceptual framework has been given by ISBA, which is Code of Ethics, and ACSF, Code of Ethics and Conduct, right? Now, this framework, what does it contain? As a just give you an example, first of all, the principles. For example, the lying principle, that I won't lie, I won't cheat anybody, I won't say bad things to anybody. So these are my principles. As a human being, these are my principles. Second thing is the threats. Threats, like my friend came and said that please lie, and you just persuaded you. So that is a threat. And then the third thing is that you as a person, you as a professional, or you as a person needs to safeguard the principles that you have, right? So because in real life also, you will be having a lot of obstacles, so you have to always debar them, right? So, safeguards is just like that. Threat is an obstacle, and you have to put in safeguards so that you're saving your principles. So safeguards is another thing that we're going to study. So these three things we're going to study in this particular framework. Let's start with the first one. Before that, one more topic that I would really wanted to discuss is, it is, see, again, this topic is not tested anywhere as such. All right, it can come probably like one OTQ or something, but this topic is important from your conceptual clarity perspective. It is not really important from the exam perspective, but it is important from the conceptual clarity perspective. So now, ethical guidance can take place. So you people know that there are two approaches to everything in life also. One is principle based approach, another is rules based approach. All right, now principle based approach says that if I have made a certain principle, I will follow it, of course, but it is circumstantial, meaning that it depends upon the circumstances. Whereas the rules based approach is very strict. It only and only follows whatever has been told. For example, let's take okay. For example, in a family, supposedly you are there as a sister, and you have a same age brother also. For example, you are twins. All right. Now your parents are saying they have taught you both the same values, the same principles of not lying, not cheating, etc. Right? You people have the same sort of principles with you. Right. But you as a person are very practical. Your parents have told you that you don't have to lie, but you know that in certain circumstances, in certain situations, you have to lie to protect yourself, or probably your family, your parents, or their feelings, etc. Right? So you are very practical. For example, you both were out somewhere, like it was late at night, and then there was a person who came up to you and asked you your address, for example. And you being practical, you have that sense of situation, so you told him a lie, right? You told him, no, I don't live here. Supposedly you live at ABC, and you told the person, I live at XYZ. because it is because of safety, right? You don't know the person and he is asking you something and it is late at night. You cannot just tell him that I live here and he'll follow it. Something can happen. Basically, safety issues, right? But your brother does not follow the practicality, does not follow the situation, is not practical driven. He is rules driven. Your parents have said, don't lie. He didn't lie. He said, I don't, no, 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 no. Why are you telling the lie? We don't live in ABC, we live in XYZ. So this is rules based approach. Now, I am not saying that rules based approach is not correct or it should not be followed or something on those lines. I just gave you an example that what is the difference between them. Both of these are correct in their own way, but sometimes, rules are so stringent, so strict that even if they require the practicality of the situation, the person who is who follows rules based approach does not necessarily utilize or is able to get benefit out of that particular situation because that person was not practical, right? So that is the reason ACCA follows a situation, a practical driven approach, which is principle based approach, not a rules based approach. So as and when the situation changes or as and when the times changes, they also amend their rules, regulations, policies, procedures, etc. So that is practicality. They are not strict on the Bible. They are not strict on the Constitution. They are always practical driven. So this is the basic meaning of practical of your principle based approach as well as your rule based approach. All right. Now I have made this table. Of course, I'm not going to read it for you right now. It will be too boring for me to read it. I've just explained whatever I have explained to you right now. Everything I have written in this table over here and in very, very simple language as to what does it focus upon. So what is principle based approach? I've also written the real life examples for your better understanding. All right. How decisions are made, how flexible it is. So we know principle based approach is very flexible, whereas the rules based approach is not flexible at all, right? Cross-border applicability, ease of following, then some of the examples I've given to you. So you can again go on the portal, you can download this PDF and you can quickly read it for you and you'll be able to understand it better. But whatever I have explained to you right now, all is contained in this particular table because I don't want to, put this in like numerical, like a sequential order. I think in this table is better representative of the concept, right? All right. So let's move to the main aspect of the syllabus, which is the fundamental principles. So principles basically means the one that we talked about right now, that not lying, being not dishonest, all of these principles that we just talked about in personal life, these are also there in our professional world. All right. So there are 5 principles that we have in ethics. All right. So this, I have a mnemonic for you ready over here, which is ICOP. You can make it for your own self also for better retention. I've made it. You can also write it as ICOP P square. So as in whatever suits you better, whatever you will be able to understand or learn better, that is, you can do it like that. But a mnemonic for your reference I've written over here. Now, the first one is integrity. Second one is objectivity. Third one is confidentiality. Fourth one is professional behavior. And fifth one is professional competence and due care. All right. We will be going one by one with these fundamental principles. I'll one by one explain to you what these fundamental principles are. All right. Then we're going to discuss the threats, that what are the threats to these principles, and then what are the safeguards that we can protect our principles. All right. Okay. Okay, these are the basic rules. So first of all, I've written a short definition, basic rules for how a professional accountant should act. So basically, how as a person you should act. You should be honest. You should not lie. You should not hurt anybody. That is how you should act as per your parents. Similarly, this has been given by the institute, that how the professional accountant, how the professional auditor has to act, how to act professionally, basically, right? They help keep the public's in trust and make sure that the work is fair and accurate. Because when the public knows that, okay, the person is integral, the person is not lying, the person is hardworking, the person is not window dressing anything, that is when they have more trust upon the whatever the work that the person has done, right? So that is the first. Now, the first principle is integrity. Now, in normal English language, we know integrity means that we are very honest. I am very straightforward. I do not hide any kind of truths if I know of. That is integral. My integrity is most important to me. That means I am very honest. Whatever I say is honest with complete honesty. I'm very straightforward. I don't sugarcoat things. That is what integrity in normal English language means. Similarly, in the principles also, integrity means the exact same thing, that the auditor is straightforward, the auditor does not lie, the auditor is very, very honest, the auditor tells the truth, howsoever important or howsoever difficult or hard it is for the auditor to tell it. For example, the auditor found that in the financial statement, when the auditor was auditing the financial statements, he or she found that okay, the provisions or the revenue that the company has recognized is not actually correct. It should have been, for example, 1,000, and the company has written 10,000. So a person, an auditor who is integral, who has integrity, will tell this situation to their to will show this situation, or will bring out this situation that hey listen, will to the management that hey listen, the revenue should have been 10, should have been 1,000, why have you given 10,000? If the person is not integral, he will simply ignore it. So that is integrity. You have to be integral, honest, straightforward, and you don't have to hide anything. What you have to tell the truth in all the situations, right? So if I quickly explain, read this for you. Be honest and straightforward, tell the truth even when it's hard. Example one, you find an error in the report, you fix it and tell the client what happens. If you find any error, you have to fix it, you have to discuss it with the client and tell them that this is a problem that we are facing. An auditor discovers the revenue was overstated, as I told you right now. The report was, wait, yeah, the report was honestly and was mistake honestly, like it was an honest mistake by the management, and correct figures even if it lowers the earnings in the short term. If something would mislead others, don't do it, speak up and fix it. As simple as that. If you think that anything that you have found in the financial statements anywhere else, if you found that is going wrong, you have to immediately speak regarding that and fix it. Like when we are talking about in the society also nowadays, there are so many malpractices happening regarding women, children, older senior citizens, all of these people. So if you have the integrity in you, if you see something is going wrong, supposingly there's a thief which is stealing the purse of a woman, so you have to speak up. Or supposingly on social media somebody is saying something else which is not actually the truth, so you're right, or if you have the integrity, you have to speak up for the truth. That is who you as a person would reflect like. Similarly is the auditor. If auditor feels that the client is doing something wrong, the client is doing some malpractices, or it can be a mistake also, it can be an honest mistake also on the client's behalf, then they have to tell them, they cannot hide anything. That is what integrity basically means. All right. Then the next one is confidentiality. As the name suggests, confidential means you cannot roam around publicizing the information of your client. I'll give you a very simple, actual, my personal example. So when I joined my company, I work in a Big Four currently. So when I joined the company, because I joined as a campus placement, so I was very new to everything. And similarly, there were other people as well who were very new to the environment, right? So when we were just given, when we were given the training of the client and the project and this and that, then it was a joke actually, but like, yeah, they told us in a little more serious manner that you cannot disclose about or the name of your client, about and the name of the client to anybody. And then somebody, not me, but somebody else in my team asked that we cannot also tell it to our parents and the friends. And they're like, no, of course you can tell it to your friends, you can tell it to your parents, but you cannot tell it to a random person that hey, my client is XYZ, my client is XYZ. So right now also I was very cautious that I don't name the client, because this is something which is known as confidential. Because you as an auditor or you as an accountant, you know so much about the company, right? You know their profits, you know the revenues, you know their billings, your payroll, etc. You know all the nitty-gritties of the client, and you cannot use that information probably for your own benefit, or probably for some XYZ's benefit, or you cannot publicize it to the general public for obvious reasons, because you need to maintain as a business. Think of you as a business owner. If you are a business owner, you have kept your clients, your employees, you don't want your information, which is very probably, your competitor can use the same information, right? So that is the reason that confidentiality, especially for the accountants, especially for the professional accountants and the auditors, is really important, because they know all the nitty gritties of the client, right? So that is the reason you have to maintain the confidentiality. You cannot publicize the private information anywhere. So that is what is confidentiality. Very easy, very simple. Keep trusted information private. Only share with people who have the right to know. So if the person has the right to know, then you can tell him. One more thing I want to just point out over here is sometimes, for example, I'll give you a simple example. Supposingly you're working in a small firm, and of course you cannot tell the nitty gritties or like private information to like public, right? But because supposingly the company was involved in some legal action, and the police came and told you and asked you that what is the problem, or asked you some private information of the company, of course you have to tell them, because they have the right to know. Up say, you cannot just tell the police that hey, listen, no, I am maintaining my confidentiality, I cannot tell you anything. Of course not, they will put you on behind the bars, of course, right? So that is the reason, only the people who have the right to know, you can tell the information to them, and nobody else. You don't tell a friend about a client's secret financial data. So this is what I just talked about. It is a personal experience of mine as well. Second, a staff member leaving the firm does not share the client details or internal reports with outsider unless required by law or contract. This is what I just told you, that if it is required by law, you have to tell it, but otherwise you cannot tell it, even if you leave the company, right? So that's that. Now, the third one is we have objectivity. Now, objectivity basically means that you are not biased in regards to, because of any XYZ reasons, whether it is, for example, you supposingly you are right now very new to the field, right? You right now you don't have any experience, right? And your father has a business, a very, very big business, and he tells you that, hey, listen, what we can do is you can look at my financial statements, and probably you can you can basically make the financial statements for me, make the balance sheet, make the trial balance, all of these things for me, right? You are there, right? And then, or probably he says that, okay, listen, because now you have studied ACCA, you know about auditing, and you know about the procedures, etc. So please audit my financial statements, for example, right? Now, because he is your father, you were auditing his financial statements of the company, and you found out that, oh, the revenue probably is overstated, or probably the profits are overstated, which is a very, very big thing, which is very material, which is very important, right? Now, because you are his daughter, you cannot tell to your father, right, that, hey, listen, the profits are overstated, please amend it. Of course not. Even if you tell him, probably he won't do that, right? So your biasness would come there, because he's my father, I know he is doing correctly, so you will just ignore it because biasness is there. It Biasness can be because of n number of reasons, which we are going to discuss in the future as well when we're talking about threats. But think of objectivity as that you have to avoid any kind of biasness. You are not biased regarding the client, the financial data, be it your father also. So that is the reason sometimes, when the client is a family member, we do not do the reporting or the auditing of that particular client, because we have a relationship with them, right? So you have to be very, very unbiased. You have to be fair. You don't have to accept any pressure on you. That is basically the meaning of objectivity, right? So be fair, avoid bias, don't let gifts, pressure, relationships mess up your judgment. So your judgment has to be very straightforward, and it cannot be biased. A manager offers you money to sign off the faulty reports. So basically, the best example for this is corruption. Corruption, if you get the money, or if they say that you'll get the power or something, or you'll get the promotion or increment or something, or you get the bonus, that is when you lose your objectivity and you get biased. So that is corruption, is a very good example for this one, right? Then the next one is professional behavior. Professional behavior basically means that because I am an ACCA or I am a CA, I am a professional person, right? I have to act or behave professionally. I have to follow the rules and regulations of ACCA. I have to behave professionally. My tone should be good. It should be professional. I should not be abusing somebody, for example. I should act in public interest. So that is professional behavior. ठीक है, right? So that is basically act in the public interest and don't do anything that would shame the profession, shame ACCA. Like you're taking bribes, you're taking corruption, all of these things you do not have to enroll into, right? Example, you refuse to sign off on a fake expense because it breaks the law and the company policy. Firm cooperates with tax authorities during investigation and avoids hiding mistakes to protect the public. So you always have to behave professionally because you are a professional person, right? Last one, very simple. Last one is professional competence and due care. Now, this has two aspects. One is professional competence, another is due care. Professional competence basically means that if I am auditing, or for example, if I am teaching you people, I am competent enough or no? ऐसा तो नहीं है कि I am not qualified myself and I'm teaching you. I don't know what is audit and then I'm teaching you. Does not make any sense. Similarly, if professional competence basically means that if the auditor is auditing a financial statement, he should be competent enough. He should have the relevant skills, knowledge, experience, all of the interest, all of these things to be able to do that particular job. If the person does not have all of these things, he or she is not professionally competent. All right. And due care basically means that you as a professional person, you have to be updated with all the recent updates of the profession. For example, in ACCA also we recently had an update for IFRS 18. So if a person who is working professionally has to know this standard, that okay, this standard has changed from this to this, all the latest updates as a professional you have to know because you are professionally doing the things in the real world, right? So that is what is professional competence means and due care means, right? So quality has to be maintained. So knowledge, skills up to date, do careful and quality work. You take a short course to learn the new tax rule before finishing a client's filing. So if there's something new, for example, now in India, GST rules have also changed. So if I am filing GST for somebody, I myself also need to have the knowledge for the same, right? So that is the reason probably I go to YouTube and find, okay, these are the changes that have been made. I wrote down on something or something, and I am then competent now and I'm maintaining my due care also. A financial statement is complicated because of the new software. You review the numbers carefully, double check the resources, and ask for the help for the same. Right. So these are the five principles that you as an accountant, you as a professional person, you as an auditor has to know. All right. Now here I have again made a small table, like a summary table. So you can probably go through this. I have written the simple idea, which is basically definition, example, second example, and the tip is also there. Basically like a summary of whatever we have done till now is there in this particular table. So this PDF is again available on the portal. So you can refer to that, and let's meet in the next video to talk about the threats to these particular principles, and let's also talk about the safeguards in relation to these particular threats, and then I think we'll be good with the chapter. Do let me know guys in case you have any doubts, any questions. I'll be more than happy to help you out with them. Hi everyone, let's start with the next topic, which is basically in relation to your threats. As in the previous video, we discussed regarding all of the principles, all of the ethical principles that every auditor, every professional, every accountant has to follow or should actually follow, like they followed certain principles in their real life as well, right? Now, as in the previous lecture, also I introduced you to that, every principle or every good thing can be impacted, can have a negative impact, can have a threat upon itself, right? So that is what in this video we are going to discuss. I am going to give you a quick overview of all of the threats that can probably hamper our principles, our ethical principles. And then in the next video, I am also going to talk about individual threats and their relevant safeguards with you people. So in this video, we're going to quickly brief up about all of the threats, and then we're going to also talk about individually so that you understand them in depth. Because again, as reiterating, this chapter is really, really very, very important from your exam perspective. All right. So first of all, when we talk about threats, as we know, threats is a negative connotation, right? It is a negative connotation wherein it negatively impacts something, right? Threat is a negative impact over something. So in this particular ethical principles, we can probably have some threats to our principles. Now these are five threats that we have, all right, five threats that we have, and the mnemonic that I have created for you people is ASIF, ASIF, whatever you want to call it, ASSIF. If you want to change this into something else, you can also write this as FISA. So any mnemonic can work according to you. Whatever mnemonic you want to work with can definitely happen. So this is the mnemonic. There are five threats majorly that we are going to cover in this syllabus. There are, of course, a couple of other threats in the real life world. But in this, for our double A syllabus, we're going to learn about five threats. All right. Now let's start by one, by me explaining to you what are these threats. So the first threat is your advocacy threat. All right. Now, advocacy threat basically means when you are taking sides of somebody else, basically your client, you as an auditor, you are taking sides of your client, all right, or you are basically favoring them in any case scenario, or you're representing them. Let me first tell you with a simple real life example, and then we're going to continue with an actual example also. So, for example, you and your brother, and you are the sister, and you have a younger brother, right? Now you got to know that your brother did some mischief, and now your mother has caught the same, and she has told the same mistake or mischief to your father, and you know your father will very very badly beat your brother because it was a big mischief that he has done. So what you do, because you know that your father is very sensitive to you and he listens to you or something, so you go up to your father, you take your brother with yourself, and you go to your father and you tell him, hey, listen, I understand that he has made a big mistake, but he's really sorry and he did not know or something. You basically are representing your brother, and on behalf of your brother, you're convincing your father that, hey, listen, he was very very innocent, he was naive, he did not know anything, and that is the reason he has done this mischief, or it was a mistake, please forgive him, etc. So you are representing your brother in front of your father. Similarly, if we go ahead with our real life example and compare this example to an auditor related scenario, supposingly the sister is the auditor, right? Your brother is the client, right? And your father, who is the third person, is basically supposedly a legal authority, supposedly a tax authority. Your father is, right? So auditor cannot in no circumstances can represent its client to somebody else. Why? Because the auditor himself is the one who can question the client or can scrutinize the client, right? So in this case, if auditor is the one who is representing its client, this will look like that it is a team. Whereas it's not a team. Client is a separate person. You are a separate person as an auditor. You both are not a one team in front of any third party. You are a separate entity, right? So you as an auditor, you cannot represent your client anywhere, be it legal authorities, taxation, any loan, if like in front of the bank also, you cannot represent, because that will look like that you are taking sides of the client, which is not possible because it is going to impact which principle of yours? Independence. Objectivity. You won't be objective. Objectivity means that you should not be biased for your client. And in this case, if you're representing your client in somebody else's in front of somebody else, you will be biased towards your client, because supposedly the bank authority questioned that their revenues are not up to the mark. You say, no, their revenues are up to the mark, this is there, this is that is there. You cannot do that. Even if one example I will want to give you from your case study only once you start practicing. in one of the case studies has mentioned that the auditor just went with the client. The auditor did not pitch in anything or did not say anything. It just went with the client. But that is also not allowed. Why? Because it is, again, it will, even if you as an auditor, you are not speaking anything, you are not saying anything on the behalf of your client or something, but still you are at least going with them. It is like a presence that you're going with them. So supposingly, if the president of India comes to you and says that, okay, I will go to the loan authority with you, of course it will be perceived as you are the same party by the loan authorities, right? Of course, for obvious reasons, because that person, नहीं तो क्यों आएगा? Why will that person accompany you? Of course, because they are with you. You are a team. That is what is not allowed. So advocacy thread is basically when you're advocating yourself, you as an auditor are advocating yourself in front of somebody else with your client, right? So that is not allowed because it will impact your independence. Why? Because you won't be seen as independent party, you will be seen as a team with your client. Secondly, you won't be objective because you will be biased. Supposingly you go to the loan authority and you say that the loan authority says that the person has to have a profit of 1,000 rupees. Now you, because you are, of course, you cannot shame your client in front of the third party. So you say, yes, the profit is 1,000. Now you go back home and you do the calculations and you find out that the profit is only 700. Now you're going to probably do some manipulations because apparently you have told the loan authorities that, hey, listen, the profit is 1,000. So that manipulation will be a problem. That is not your principle. You cannot do that. So that is the first thread, which is advocacy out of SF, the mnemonic ASSIF. The A stands for advocacy thread. Now the next S stands for self-interest threat. I'm sure you would definitely have heard it somewhere or the other. Second threat is basically your self-interest threat. Self-interest, as the word only says, self-interest. I have a personal interest or personal biasness towards something. मेरा भी कुछ interest है उस चीज में. So self-interest basically means, again, supposingly, again, the same example that I gave for the advocacy. Supposingly you are the sister and your brother is there, and he has done some mischief or something, and he is very scared to tell your mother, right? So he says, okay, I will do your homework, or I will do something. I will clean your room, or I will help you. I will drive you to somebody, and I won't tell you about your, friends or something, something. He gives you something, a bait he gives it to you. And he says that if you don't tell the mother about the mischief that I have done, I will supposedly do your homework. So in this, actually what the sister should do, she should tell your mother, she should tell your father, right, that this is the mischief that the person, your brother, has done, and he should be punished, or he should be scolded, or he should be explained that this should not have been done. But because of that personal biasness, because of the interest that you have, that okay, the your brother will be giving you, will be doing your homework, or will be cleaning your room, you say, okay, chalo, theek hai, let's ignore the mistake that you have done and you do my work. So here that self-interest came, and it overpowered your ethical, the principal ethical things that you had, that you do not have to lie, you have to always tell the truth, at least to your parents. So that got overpowered. So similarly, it can happen in professional world also with the auditor. Supposedly the client says that I will be giving you a 20% of bonus if you show my profit as 1,000. So right now, because the loan authority said the person that you need to maintain a profit of 1,000 rupees, right, for example, and now the client comes up to you and says that you have to show the profit as 1,000, and you will be getting 20% bonus on your fees that I will be giving to you. So now here the auditor has a self-interest that if I show the profit as 1,000, I am going to get that 20%, and supposedly that 20% is huge amount. So that is a self-interest threat, that because again here what is getting impacted, your objectivity, your integrity, because you're not honest, right? You're not maintaining independence, you're not maintaining biasness. So that is what is overpowering, that can take a back seat, and these threats can overpower. So we have to protect our ethical principles, right? So this basically means self-interest threat, as the name only suggests, that you have certain interest on over situation or on a thing which probably can impact your principles like independence, objectivity, integrity, all of these, right? So this is self-interest. Now the third one is self-review threat. So again, as the name suggests, these are very self-explanatory threats that we have. The third one that we have is self-review threat. Now, what is self-review threat? Self means I. I am reviewing my own work. That is self-review threat. For example, now, supposingly you are in school right now, right? You are the student and you appeared for a test, right? So this is the mock paper. Sometimes, do you remember in the school, our teachers used to say, when a small test she used to take, and she used to say you can do a peer marking with your friend. So whosoever is sitting next to you, they you can swap the sheet with your friends and you can do a self marking and tell me the marks. So supposedly you and your friend are there, right? And you are best buddies or best friends, and you interchange the sheet, and you people know that okay, because I am marking my friend's sheet and he is marking mine, so we will say ki, okay, dono ko will let's give 20 out of 25, or supposing 21 out of 25, let's give it to us, because we are only evaluating our own answers. So that is one thing, because you're biased, your objectivity is compromised because it is your own sheet, you won't take out your own mistakes, right? So supposingly idhar to maine swap kara di, here I swapped your sheet. Supposingly ma'am said self mark yourself and let me know the marks. She says that you have attempted the test and you only mark it for yourself and then give me the script. I will write the answer. Supposing she won't review anything, she's third party, is not reviewing anything. So in those case scenarios, you will be very biased. Who like they, nobody in the whole world will take out their own mistakes and give them lesser marks. Of course not. Supposing you wrote an answer and you actually deserved a 2 out of 5, but you, because it is your own answers, probably you did not were not able to gauge as to what is wrong, or you simply ignored that same mistake that you have done and you gave yourself a 4 and 5. So here that biasness came because you're reviewing your own work, and nobody in the entire world is so good enough or honest enough to to identify their own mistakes. They don't have the eye to do so, right? Only a third party can come and tell them that okay, hey, listen, you made these mistakes and this is how you correct it, right? Which is the job of your teacher. So that is a simple example. In real world also, like the auditor, sometimes the auditor can review their own work. Let me give you an example for that as well. Now, supposingly, there's a company which is XYZ and company, who is a services based company, right? You are working over there and you are making the financial statements of this particular company. All right. You have made the balance sheet and you have checked the assets and liabilities by your own self, right? For the year ended 2005, for example. Now you have already done this work. This is already done. And after that, you realize that probably I'm not suitable for this job, or the company is not good, or because of any reason, you leave XYZ company and you join ABC and company, who provides audit related services. All right. Now you are working as an auditor over here, right? And now your firm is auditing XYZ company, right? So your firm ABC Limited is now auditing XYZ company. Auditing means that they are checking the financial statements of XYZ and company, and the team, the audit engagement team, has you in it. So you are part of the team that are auditing the financial statements. So of course, because you are reviewing, your work is to review, you check everything. You have only made the financial statements over here, and now you are only reviewing the work. Do you think that you will identify any mistakes over here? Of course not. Because even if there are some mistakes in the balance sheet, some mistakes in the P&L account, etc., you will be very rigid to identify any sort of mistakes in your financial statements because of obvious reasons, right? So that is here your self-review threat will arise, because even if there was a small error, supposing 10 rupee error, 100 rupee error, you will simply ignore it and you'll move forward. You'll say, yes, yes, it's absolutely fine. So that is self-reviewing. When you're reviewing your own work, when you're reviewing, self-reviewing the work that you have only done, and that will compromise your independence, your objectivity, your integrity as well, because you might lie, right? All right. Now the fourth threat that we have, which is I, is asif mein I, is for intimidation. Now intimidation can be actual. It can also be perceived. Okay. So as the name also suggests, intimidation, as the If you people know the English version, English meaning of intimidation is when you're intimidated by somebody, or you're scared of somebody, or you get a little, down because of somebody else's behavior. That is basically intimidation. So now intimidation can be actual also, when actually it is happening with you, and it can also be perceived, wherein you think that it can happen. You're only perceiving that there is an intimidation threat, but actually it's not. For example, now let me give you a quick example. Supposingly, again, let's take the example of you and your brother. Supposingly you are the sister, your brother. Now he did some mischief again, and he told you that if you tell my our mother that I did this mischief, I will tell mother that you failed in an exam, for example. So you are intimidating, or you're threatening basically your sister, that if you tell my mischief to the mother, I will also tell you your mistake to mother, or I will tell you that you failed in the exam. So now this is an actual intimidation that you are doing, because you know that, okay, I don't want my mother to know that I failed an exam. So you didn't do not tell your mother about the mischief done by your brother, right? So in those cases, you will be intimidated by your brother, that he will say, okay, I will not tell, I don't tell it. And you're scared. You are scared because he might tell this to your mother, right? So that is an actual intimidation that again impacts your objectivity, again impacts your independence, again impacts your integrity principle. Perceived can be that, he is just acting like he will tell your mother, but actually he probably won't tell, or he's just surface level intimidating you, that please don't tell the mother, or else I'll not do this, I'll not do it, basically threatening you in any case scenario. So that is intimidation. So in if I compare this example to a real life example, which is an auditor, in those cases, supposedly the client says, your client who is supposing XYZ says to ABC, ABC is the auditor. Okay, so XYZ says to the auditor that if you take out mistakes in the financial statements, I will not be paying you your fees, or probably I will reduce your fees from 10,000 rupees to 5,000 rupees. I don't care. So I am threatening you, or I will remove you from the auditor, from being my client, my auditor. So audit firm will lose out one of its client, and that they won't want, right? So that is again an example of intimidation threat. All right. So right now I am just giving you a surface level introduction meaning, so that at least you are familiar with these words, with these terminologies. And in the next videos, we are going to deep dive into each and every one of the threats as well. All right. Okay, now the last one is your familiarity threat. Again, that is again, as the name suggests, familiarity. You are familiar with your client, or you have a long-standing relationship with your client, or something on those lines. That is the basic meaning of familiarity threat. Supposingly, I think I gave somewhere this example previously as well. Supposingly, you are there, all right, sister and brother is there, right? Now, because you are familiar with your brother, supposedly he has a accounting firm, and you are the auditor, for example, right? You are the auditor, and he has appointed you to be the auditor of his firm. It is a listed entity, right? So in those case scenarios, because you are familiar with your brother, you have a family relation with your brother, you will be again very you will doubt, or you will take out the mistakes very less of your brother, because you know it is your brother. You will just hide those mistakes or something, right? Or for example, you're working for a client, and you are working for 10 years with that client, so you know every person very well. Your friends, you go out with them, have dinners, have lunches, go on trips also with them. So that is a familiarity threat, because of which you might compromise on your objectivity and integrity and independence, because you are very familiar with that particular person, and you might not take out their mistakes as you will take out for a new client, right? So that is a familiarity threat. So these are 5 threats: your advocacy, self-interest, self-review, intimidation, and familiarity threat. So now let's discuss each of these threats in detail with examples also, so that you understand them in little more brief. All right, let's first start with the first threat that we have, which is self-interest threat. So as in the previous video, I have already given you information or an introduction what is self-interest threat. When I personally have, because of my interest in something, I can influence the decision or influence the financial statements accordingly as an auditor. That is basically the meaning of self-interest threat. Right now, let's read the definition in audit, guys, because these things are really important. These can come as your knowledge based questions, although I have rarely seen these definitions coming in. But when you remember these definitions, it becomes easy for you only to identify certain situations. These topics, these all threats, principles, safeguards, these are all going to come as part of your case study base, which we are going to do. We are going to do the case studies also, but just letting you know. All right, okay. The threat where the auditor, so now there can be two types of threats or two types of interest that you can have. One is a financial, which is monetary. Probably your fees is dependent, your bonus is dependent, as I gave you the example in the previous video about the bonus. So that is a financial interest. Or a non-financial interest wherein you're getting something as which is not related to your finances. Supposingly you are getting a paid trip, or your all the team members are getting lavish dinners or expensive dinners or something on those lines, or getting like huge Diwali gifts or Eid gifts or all of these gifts. So that is basically a non-financial interest, wherein it is not just about the money, it is about the other things or other perks and perils that perks basically that you are getting from your client. Interest that could unfairly influence that judgment or behavior. Meaning basically I've written over here, and then I've also written the example for you. If money or a relationship could bias with what the auditor decides, and independence in and objectivity is at risk. So I told you in the previous video about the independence, about the objectivity, that becomes a risky area if the auditor is biased towards something because of their own interest. Example, in an auditor is offered a paid trip. I just now gave you this example by a client to influence a favorable report, the decline and keep decisions based on the evidence and note the situation. So that is basically what is meant by influencing the decisions made by the auditor. Now, there are few examples. Now, these examples are really very important from your exam perspective. From your section A OTQs also can come, and case-based scenarios can also come from these questions. So these are very important. And in this particular slides, because I will be providing you these slides as part of the course. So these slides, I have tried to include every single pointer that you need to know from your OTQs perspective and from your case-based questions perspective. So you won't need to go to your study text again, navigate through, or study hub, navigate through. You can just rely upon these notes and you will be good to go. All right, the first one is fee dependency. So your fees, as the name suggests, your fees is dependent upon something. Right, sometimes what can happen is, supposingly you as an audit client, you audit firm, for example, you go and audit for certain firms, right? So you have your clients, right? Supposingly, let's take the example of EY is an auditing firm, mainly an auditing firm, right? And it has its certain clients that they audit, right? Now, for example, the full year the revenue that EY generates is supposedly 10,000 rupees, very small, but I'm just telling you, supposedly it generates a revenue of 10,000 rupees. All right. Now it has a client, supposedly it has Zepto, for example, or it has Zomato. Let's take example of Zomato because it is a listed entity, or let's take both the examples. Wait, let's take both examples. Zepto, which is a non-listed entity, Zomato, which is a listed entity, right? This is a listed company. Supposingly, Zomato is catering to supposedly 6,000 of out 6,000 revenue out of 10,000 for the company, which is 60% of 10,000 rupees, which is too much. More than half of your revenue is based upon Zomato, right? If they leave, for example, if they withdraw the audit, you are just left with 4,000, which is not even like 50% of the revenue which is remaining. So you are too much dependent upon a particular company, which is too much, right? So this is the meaning of fee dependency. Similarly, supposing Zomato is contributing 2,000 rupees, which is 20% of the revenue of your revenue. So it is also a big client. So after Zomato, it is Zepto who is a bigger client for you. So again, you will have your self-interest. You will possibly go to any lengths to save that client if that client says I am going. So supposedly Zomato says that, okay, I will not leave your firm, you will be my auditor, but you need to show my profit as an increased profit or an increased revenue than it is actually is. So because your firm has so much of firm, fee dependency, and every firm nowadays, of course, for obvious reasons, they're revenue making firms. Of course, you don't want losses for your companies, right? If you people also own any company, any firm, you people also work for it for the profit making perspective of it, right? Me at Being Guesses also, our one of the agendas, of course, is to mentor you, to help you, etc. But ultimately we also want money, because we are investing so much time, investment, money, resources, etc. for you people. So we don't want to make any losses, of course, right? So again, every firm apart from the NGOs, it is always working for a profit making motive, right? So EY would also think that I also want to earn profit, and I cannot accept, or I will not be able to work if Zomato is not there for me, and it will be very difficult for me to get another client who is giving me 60% of the revenue that I have. So supposing Zomato says that my profit actually is 10 rupees, but I wanted to show it as a 20 rupees. So because you want to protect that client and you don't want that client to go or leave you, so you say, okay, I am okay, I will give you 20 rupees profit, I will show up 20 rupees profit, don't worry. So that is the basic meaning. Or supposingly Zomato has wrongly showed a profit of 20 and they said, you don't have to change it, you don't have to change it 10. So because you as a firm, you don't want to lose your client, so you say, okay, we are okay, we don't have any problem in showing a negative or false report. So in that cases, your objectivity, your integrity, your independence is all getting affected, right? So this is basically a threat, an example of threat. Now let's come to safeguards. So basically, these are your safeguards. If an audit fee is 15% or more of the total revenue, like in our case, it was 60%, so it is more than 15 of audit firm for 2 consecutive years, 2 back-to-back years. Consecutive means back-to-back, right? So year 2005 and 2006, dono saal mein you had 15% of revenue from that particular client, then the safeguard needs to be applied for the listed clients. You have to have listed clients. So your criteria, this criteria, guys, is very important. It does come into your exam. They give you a revenue figure, and then you have to identify if it is all right or if a safeguard needs to be applied, right? So for listed clients, there are two things. I give example here also for listed client, which is Zomato. So if the fees is exceeding more than 15% for 2 years consecutively, you have to apply safeguards. And if it is a non-listed client like Zomato, if it exceeds more than 30%, yahan pe it was only 20%. If you see, I gave 2000 as an example. So it is okay. 2000 is okay because it is a non-listed client. But if this was 30%, 3000 or 4000, then in those cases, and for 5 years consecutively. So the criteria changes for listed and non-listed. A lot of students do get confused because they only know about this listed clients criteria, about the 15%, but they don't know about the 30% criteria. So you people have to know this criteria because you're my students, all right? So 30% or more of the total revenue for 5 consecutive years, then you have to apply the safeguards. If it is below that, you don't have any problem. Understood? So this is basically the criteria. Now, what are the safeguards for the same is, first of all, you have to inform the audit committee of the client that, hey, listen, we are overly dependent upon you. You have to inform them. They should know about this scenario, that there is a over reliance upon the same. Then you have to make sure that your audit quality, and see guys, aisa nahi hai ki you have to simply reject the client. Of course, you won't reject the client, but you have to put in some safeguards. You cannot decline the client. You cannot decline the audit. You have to have some safeguards ki you are having that client, but your quality is also maintained, right? So your quality has to be top notch. And this is very important. This is very important, which is your independent engagement quality reviewer, which is basically an EQR. This is basically, you have your audit committee, you have your audit engagement team, right? Apart from that team, there is an external reviewer or independent reviewer from your company only, from an auditor's company only. And he is actually checking if everything is going correctly or no, and his report is considered to be valid, not yours as a team, because you can be biased. But he is an external party, he is an independent engagement quality reviewer, and he will be checking all of these things. And as per him, if everything is going right, you are okay, there's no problem in the company, right? So this is the meaning of fee dependency. Now the next example that we have is gifts and hospitality. So this basically means that when you are getting some sort of gifts or some sort of hospitality from your client, for example, they're giving you very, very heavy Diwali gifts, as I mentioned, or like generally also without any reason, they're giving you some lavish gifts or something, or they're giving you some expensive dinners or lunches or some trips or something, or a hotel stay for you and for your team or something. So that is basically the meaning of gifts and hospitality. So of course, who does not like gifts? Of course, who does not like good hospitality, good trips? Of course. So that way, that is one of the examples which can be a self-interest thread, because probably because of the gifts that you're getting, you want to keep receiving those gifts, or you want to keep receiving that hospitality, and that is the reason you don't want to lose that client. And then again, your objectivity, your independence, all of these get impacted. So that is the meaning of goods and hospitality. One more thing is that if the goods that you're receiving, the gifts or the hospitality that you're receiving, is very trivial. Trivial means very small. If you see here, except only if the value is trivial. Trivial means small. It is not material. It's very small and inconsequential. Inconsequential means it's not material. It's a very small thing. For example, if they ask you that, for example, the client team is sitting, in your team is sitting, and they say, let's order tea. So everybody is drinking tea. It's not something that your team is specifically getting that service. So that is okay, that's fine. If for example they give you a small gift, like a small gift which is not very big or not, that is everybody is getting that's then fine. But they say that your team specifically is going to get a lavish exclusive vacation to like international vacation or something. That is a problematic situation. And how can you what is the safeguard for that situation? So this is basically your threat. And what is the safeguard for the situation? That you can simply decline that, hey listen, no, I don't want this gift, hey listen, I don't want this trip, etc. So simply ignore, simply decline that offer that you're getting. Not declining the audit, of course, declining the offer, declining what they are giving to you. Just simply say no. That is all, right? Next example is owning shares or financial interest in the audit client. So this is one of the, I can give you a real life example for this one as well. So if you are part of any big four and you are there in their audit team, like if I give the example of EY specifically where I'm working right now, here also when we are there in audit and we are auditing a certain client, they give us a list of companies that we cannot have our shares into. Shares basically mean that the stock market shares that we cannot carry the shares of those. So if for example I am working on the client and they give me a list that, hey listen, you cannot have these shares with you, I have to dispose of those shares. Why? Because probably supposedly EY is auditing Zomato. I'm just giving you an example. I'm not this is not actual case scenario, I'm just giving you an example. Supposedly EY is auditing Zomato and you are in that team who is auditing Zomato, and you also have Zomato shares, you also have its shares. And because you have a financial interest, because you own certain financial shares of that company, so you might again you want to protect your investment. Supposedly Zomato is doing a big fraud, and due to that fraud, if EY is getting that fraud in limelight or in public eye, Zomato can shut down. And if shut down, your investments or supposedly lakhs and lakhs of rupees can come down to zero. So as a person who has invested in Zomato, you will not take out any mistakes or any problems in Zomato. So that is because you owe their shares, you have their shares, you have financial interest. So supposedly not you, but your family member, supposing your father has some shares or your brother has some shares. So again, in those case scenarios, because you again have a financial interest, because it is your relationship with them, your family. So again, you can be biased, your objectivity can be compromised, your integrity can be compromised. So that is the basic meaning of owning shares, which is not allowed. Now, what are the two safeguards that we are going to talk about? So now it can be, one is the partner. So whosoever is the head, the partner of the audit firm, he has to dispose of the shares irrespective, or simply decline the client, simply decline Zomato that, hey, we cannot work with you. So either the person, the partner, has to dispose of the shares, or they have to decline the audit. These are the two safeguards that they can imply. Other is other members of the team, supposing audit partner or audit staff. These are small people in the team, the part of the team. They have their shares in Zomato, so they will immediately, either they can again dispose of the shares if they want to remain in that particular team of audit who is auditing Zomato. If not, they have to be removed from that particular team. So they are there in the company. So you people already know that supposedly it is my ABC company. I have multiple different clients. One is Zomato, one is Zepto, for example, one is Swiggy, for example. So all of these people are my different clients. And ABC Limited will have different engagement teams for each of these clients. Supposingly, I am there in Zomato and I have the shares of Zomato. So my company will say, please dispose of, or we'll shift. So you say, yes, please shift it to me to the other client. So you are shifted to Zomato, Swiggy, for example. So that is, either you dispose of the shares if you want to remain in the same team, or you have to be removed from that particular team and you can work with the other client, for example. Right? So this is an example of self-interest threat again. Next example, let's move overdue fees. Now, this is again a very, very important self-interest threat example. Overdue basically means that supposedly you have been working with the client from past 2 years, for example. An auditor has not paid you the fees for the previous 2 years right now. The client has not paid you the fees of these 2 years as well. So you as an auditor, you will feel indebted. Why? Because you will feel that if I don't if I don't listen to the client, or I don't pass my judgments in the favor of the client, then you will feel that probably that those 2 years fees I will not get. For obvious reasons, you will feel that the client will again take that money from me and will not give the money, because there will be a dispute then. So that is the meaning of overdue fees, that it should not happen if you have an overdue fees. So just a minute. Yeah. Seek payment before issuing the report. So you should always seek payment of the undue overdue fees before you pass on the auditor's report. Client favoritism can happen to secure the payment for obvious reasons, because you want to be in a good picture with the client, good image with the client, right? So you don't want to disappoint them, and because if they might get disappointed, you might not get your fees back, right? The threat factors to assess value of the debt. So again, you have to assess the value of the debt they owe. For example, it is only a small amount of your fees. That's okay, that's fine. But if it is a whole fees or a large portion of the fees, then that's a problem. How long it has been outstanding, like I give you the example that 2 years. So it can be lesser than 6 months, it can be more than 2 years also. So you have to assess the reasonableness of the same, and ability and willingness to pay the overdue fees. So supposing the client is not willing you only to pay the fees, again you will be having that self-interest threat. Or if the client says, yes, we will pay after these months, so you have a payment plan ready with you. So only and only pay if you have a payment plan ready with you, then you are okay to work with the client. So that is a safeguard. Obtain partial or full payment for the fees. So before you proceed with the next year, you say, please clear our dues. Only then we are going to work for the third year, or else we are not going to work for the third year. So that is first. Use an appropriate reviewer who did not participate in the audit review work to, again, similar to the first example that I gave to you. You can also have a EQR, which is independent engagement quality reviewer, who will check your work and see if there's no problem. Stop work, have a payment plan ready, and then start the work. So you stop the work, you ask them, okay, if you're not paying us right now, please provide us with a payment plan, so that we know that when are you going to make our payment, and then I will continue with the audit. So what are the safeguards? First is, either I receive the partial or full payment immediately, or I receive a payment plan with them, and I will also be having a EQR who will be reviewing the work done by the client, by the auditor. All right. So this is overdue fees. Overdue fees basically means when the client has not made you the payment of the previous audit that you have done, until now you have not gotten the payment. All right. Next, business relationships with the client. Again, you cannot have any sort of relationship with them, be it business, be it personal, be it otherwise, right? Some of the firms go into joint ventures, or they provide the same services. Supposedly there's a service that can be combined with audit, so that work together. That cannot happen, because ultimately I, as an auditor, I am actually not in favor of the client. I'm scrutinizing the client. So how can I work with them together? Of course not, right? If I, as a teacher, I am reviewing your work, I'm checking your answers, you and I cannot work on a single test. Like if I give you a test number 1 and I told you, please do this test, answer, and give it back to me for review. But I cannot write the answers on your behalf. I cannot work with you to do that test, because ultimately I am reviewing, and that's not my job, right? Similarly, it's not the job of the auditor to work together with the client. It has to have a different relationship. So business, be it a business relationship, be it a personal relationship, the auditor cannot happen. That cannot basically happen, right? If that is happening, you will have to establish firm policies. You have to withdraw from that engagement. Or if there's only one person who is engaged with that particular client, so for example, your partner is only the one, not the full company, not the full team, only the partner is engaging with that particular client, then that partner has to be removed from that particular engagement team, right? So this is the basic meaning of business relationship with the client. Next one is contingent fees. This is a straight no. You don't have any safeguards. It is a straight ban. It is straight no. Contingent fees basically means that my fees is based upon a certain criteria. So a real life example that I want to give you from your case studies only, that you are going to study in the future, is that, for example, the company says that your fees is based upon our profits. So for example, if I earn a 10,000 rupees profit, supposedly you will get 10% of the profit that I earn, right? So supposedly I will, the company, if the company gets a 10,000 rupees profit, you will get 10% of it, which is a 1,000 rupees as the fees for the full audit, all right? And for supposedly if it decreases to 5,000, again you are going to get 10% of it, so you're going to get only 500 rupees as the fees. So think of yourself, agar somebody says it to you that if the what you'll think, supposedly you are the auditor and you have the profit as 10,000 rupees, but you got to know that there were some expenses which were missed out, and now once you add those expenses, your profit is going to get to 5,000. You will be very reluctant to do this change. Why? Because your profit is also getting impacted because of the change in the profit that they have. Your fees is also getting impacted because your fees is based upon the profit, which is not required, which is not relevant. So your fees as an auditor cannot be based upon any of the financial statement items of the company or any other factors. Like, it should be separate from all of these. Your fees should be based upon the time that you as an auditor are devoting. Your fees should be devoted upon the experience, the resources, basically the expertise that you are bringing to the table. And it should be fixed fees. It should not be based upon any third party thing, right? Supposedly, your parents come up to me and say that if my child scores above 50, you will be getting a fees of this much. If my child scores below 40, this is what your fees is going to be. So that will be very self-interest to me. Supposing your parents say, if my child gets above 70 marks, I will give you 70,000 rupees. So I will have so much of self-interest in that. I will focus all my efforts and my energy onto you, and I will outlook the other students because they are getting me only a certain fees. But you are giving me 70,000 if you get 70 marks in the exam, right? So I will devote more time to you, more energy to you, more resources to you, more live classes to you, etc., more question practice for you, more evaluations for you. So that will be a bias for the other students. So my objectivity is compromised over here. So that is contingent fee. It's straight away banned for you. All right. Okay. Next. Loans and guarantees. Of course, the threat to independence is also there. If, for example, you are taking any kinds of loans or giving any kinds of loans, you of course cannot give. So you will take any loans from any of the client that you have, right? So if we quickly read this portion for you. The threat to independence depends on who the lender is, a bank, a financial institute, or a non-bank, and how big the loan or guarantee is. Loans and guarantees to audit clients are not permitted unless immaterial. So if it is not material, it's not a problem. For the other examples also, if it is not material, we are okay with it. We don't have any problem with it, right? Making the loan or the client, if the audit client is a bank, supposedly my client is only the bank, supposedly I am EY and I'm auditing HDFC Bank, so that is the example of a bank or a similar financial institute. The loan and guarantee is with the firm, the or team member or their immediate family, and the loan is not made under normal lending procedures, terms and conditions is not permitted. Now, for example, my company is EY and I am auditing HDFC Bank. The team who is auditing the HDFC Bank, the head, the partner of that company, is getting some special treatment from HDFC Bank, because supposedly I am the head of the engagement team and I want to take some home loan, for example. All right, I want to take home loan. Sorry. Yeah, I want to take a home loan. And I ask the bank that what are the terms and conditions of the home loan. The bank says that, okay, because you are the partner of our auditor, we are going to give you some special conditions. Supposedly, the interest that we charge with the normal people is 10%. But with you, because you are auditor, we this and that and this and that, I will provide you a 5% interest. Only you have to give us 5%. So you as an auditor, you might feel indebted, right? You might feel, oh my God, this is such a big favor that they're going to me. So I will persuade my team who is doing the audit that please be lenient with them. And that is not allowed. Being lenient is not allowed. So because you have a self-interest that they are asking you only 5% instead of a normal 10%, that is not allowed. You cannot do it. Either you have to not take the loan or you have to simply be removed from the audit team. Right? So this is an example of loans and agreements. Supposedly, if the terms and conditions of the auditor who's taking the loan and the normal person who is taking a loan, supposing you go to the HDFC Bank and I as an auditor go to the HDFC Bank and I am getting a loan at 10%, you are also getting the loan at 10%, it is absolutely fine. It is under normal lending procedure, so that is allowed. But if it is not under that, that's not allowed, right? So this is the basic example of loans and guarantees as well. I hope now, so with this, we are done with self-interest threat. And I hope this was clear to you. The first thing that we discussed was about fee dependency, wherein we discussed 15% and 30%. Then we discussed the second one, which is gifts and hospitality, wherein you have to remember two keywords, trivial and inconsequential. So these two words you have to remember. Then shares and financial interest, if you have any, that is what we discussed. Overdue fees is what we discussed. Business relationships, contingent fees, which is not allowed, which is banned, and then loans and guarantees for the audit client. Right? So I hope this is clear to you. Self-interest is clear to you. Let's now move to the next threat that we have is familiarity threat. All right, let's jump to the next threat that we have, which is familiarity threat. Familiarity, we have already discussed in the previous lecture that it means that when the auditor becomes too familiar or too trusting or too sympathetic towards the client. For example, it is their family members or their friends or long standing, supposedly they were working with the client for last 10 years. So they know who the management is, who the people are. So they are very familiar with them. They go on trips or something. So that is very familiar. So that is what is meant by auditor becomes too familiar or too sympathetic. Sorry. Too sympathetic, trusting of the client crosses professional boundaries. So when they cross the professional boundaries is when they go to the, luxurious vacations and all of these. These are crossing the boundaries of professionalism. This is your personal thing, right? Losing skepticism. So what do we understand by professional skepticism? Professional skepticism, this word you are going to see a lot of many times in the entire audit syllabus, and even you have to write this into some certain areas. Professional skepticism means that having a questioning mind. You're always questioning that auditor, that the client would have done this wrong, that wrong, this wrong. Always questioning the client because you have to be, you are auditor. That is your job. You have to always question. So that is professional skepticism, right? It increases the risk of material misstatement and order losing objectivity and independence because probably because you already know the client, you know कि उन्होंने कुछ गलत नहीं करा होगा, they won't have done anything wrong. So you are very trusting of the client. You say, okay, this is fine. If the client has said that the profit is 10,000, if they've written 10,000, I will not double check it. That is losing objectivity. That is losing independence. Auditor ka work the auditor's work is to check if that 10,000 is okay or no. But you as an auditor, you're trusting the client. You say it's okay. They are very trustworthy and they are friends and family. So you don't do that. That is what is a problematic situation. All right. Now, the first example, just like we did for the self-interest threat, the example of our familiarity threat is long association of senior personnel. That is what I told you. For example, my auditor is ABC, my client is XYZ, their senior management, the senior management here and the senior management here are best friends. They are best friends. They go to, vacations or something. And now supposedly the auditor is auditing the audit team is auditing the financial statements of the client, and they come across a certain problem, a certain big blunder that the client has done, and they go to their senior management. They ask them, hey, listen, this is what the problem has arisen. Do you think that we should highlight, or this should be actually highlight? And the senior manager says, no, it's okay, he is my best friend, let you ignore this. That is independence, objectivity, and integrity being impacted, right? Okay. So using the senior people on the engagement for a long period can erode skepticism and lead to misstatements. Self-interest angle, fear of losing the longs. Again, here it is a combination. So long association of senior personnel is a combination of familiarity plus self-interest also, because you might think that I might lose the client if I don't do this. I might lose my friend or my family if I tell them that this is a mistake, right? So that is your influential judgment that you are having because it is your friend, or the you have a long association with them, right? Safeguards. What are the safeguards? Rotate the individual of the team. So if the senior management has been there in the team for last 10 years, rotate them, shift them, keep rotating them so that new people on and on come and they don't have the relationships for a long term, right? Change the role or the nature of the task of the individual. Use an appropriate reviewer. Similarly, EQR is important. So do have that EQR with you. Conduct regular, independent, internal, external reviews for the same. Now, again, there can be two situations. One, when we have a listed client. So listed client ki requirements, what are those? Engagement partner, engagement quality reviewer. So you people know what is an engagement partner. Engagement partner is a person who is probably heading the engagement, right? He is the partner. Then EQR is a separate external party who is reviewing their work. So that is EQR. And audit key partner is the people, the staff that is working in the team, the lower level people who are working in the team. So these three people, these are the cooling rotation periods that we have to have, and these are the cooling off periods. So first of all, let's see here. Okay. Engagement partner is the first person who is the team lead, team head. EQR, who is the external reviewer, or any other key partner must not act more than 7 cumulative years on an engagement. After 7 years, a cooling off period is required. So they can work for straight 7 years. Once they have completed that 7 years target, they have to be rotated. They have to have a cooling off period. Cooling off basically means that in this period, they cannot work with that particular client or that particular engagement. They have to simply withdraw from that for that particular years. All right. So this is the years that they have to withdraw. For partner, 5 years they cannot work on the engagement. For EQR, 3 years they cannot work on the engagement. And for key or partner, 2 years they cannot work on the same engagement. So please, guys, please make short notes of this, or please remember this, because this is very important from your OTQ's perspective. 7 years for a listed client, a person can be on the same engagement for straight 7 years, or even there can be breaks in between. Once 7 years have been crossed, then they have to have a cooling off period. If it was a partner, 5 years they cannot work. 3, they can work actually, but not on the same engagement, right? EQR 3 years, key audit partner is for 2 years. All right. Practical example, long tenure. Martin, supposedly XYZ, is an audit engagement partner for listed for 5 years, then a 2 years career gap. So she was straight working for 5 years, then she took a career gap of 2 years. So technically, abhi 7 nahi hua hai, only 5 has done. When she returns back, she can only work for 2 more years, and then she again has to go on a cooling off period. So it is cumulation. Even if she is taking breaks, it is considered as a cumulation. Right? Upon return, total time to be 7 years. Cooling off adds 5 years before the involvement again. So 5 years she has already worked. 2 years break. After 2 years, she can only work for 2 years, and then she has again to go for a cooling off period of how much? 5 years, because she was the engagement partner on this client, for example. Right? So this is very, very important, guys. 7 years is the cumulative time that you can work, and then you have to have 5, 3, and 2 as your cooling off periods. All right, next example. Family and personal relationships. So again, this I've already explained to you that you cannot have any family or personal relationships with the audit client. Then recruitment services. Again, recruitment services is basically when you are recruiting somebody from my audit engagement team to your client team. That I gave you the example that I was firstly working with my client, and then I moved to audit, and then there was a self-review thread. Similarly here also, if you're doing any recruitment services, supposedly the senior management of the auditor is going to now become the partner in the client, that cannot happen. That is again a problematic situation, because independence, objectivity, integrity can be impacted over here big time, right? So that is again recruitment services which you are not allowed to be performed. Okay, next one. Employment with the audit client. Again, this is very similar to this one. Let's read the examples first. An immediate family member is a director of the client. A lot of familiarity threat. Remove the related audit team member from the engagement. Whosoever is related to the director, they have to be removed from the engagement. A partner sibling work at client CFO. Apply safeguards, possibly rotate the assignments, have an independent reviewer, or simply remove that person from the team. Client wants a senior financial officer. Firm can review qualification but less. So again, recruitments is an example. They can review the qualifications if they want to, but they cannot recruit somebody because there can be a familiarity, because I will already be knowing the person already. Right? So this is your familiarity threat. So first one was long association of the senior personnel. Second was family and personal relationships, recruitment services, employment with the audit client. So these are 4 things that you have to remember for your familiarity threat. I hope they're clear. Let's move to the next threat now. All right, let's start with the 4th threat now. We are done with the 3. This is the 4th one. Advocacy threat. As I mentioned, as I explained to you in the previous lectures also, what is advocacy? Advocacy basically means when you are advocating yourself, or you're promoting, or you're taking sides of your client in somebody else's presence, be it a bank, be it a legal authority, be it a tax authority, which is not allowed. So promoting the position of a client or representing them in some way would mean the audit firm is seen to be taking sides of the client, which should not be the case scenario. So examples are these. Representing the client in court or in any dispute where the matter is material to the financial statements. I give you this example. Negotiating on client's behalf for finance. Supposing they are taking any loan. So the auditor is negotiating that this is the amount that we have to receive. No, this is the amount that you have to receive. So negotiating, again, not possible. Loan of personal from an audit firm to the client, again, not possible. Providing valuation services or the tax services, as we discussed in the review thread also, this is not at all allowed. Valuation, tax services, not allowed to the client, audit client, right? So this is your advocacy threat. The next threat that we have is intimidation threat. Again, when you're getting intimidated by your client due to any reason, it can be actual, as I explained in the earlier lecture, it can be actual, it can be perceived pressures from the client, or to attempt exercise under undue influence if you have any. Examples: fee dependency, gifts, hospitality, family personal relationships, recruitment services. All of these can also lead to your intimidation threat. That you're intimidated, you're scared of the client. What if the client leaves? If it is fee dependency, what if the client stop giving us gifts? That is intimidation. What if client threaten us? Intimidation. So these are the examples of intimidation. And in any case scenario, you have to, what are the safeguards? Simply withdraw from the audit. If they are not willing to reduce these, simply withdraw from the audit or change the team. Your team can be changed if they have any advocacy or intimidation threats. So that can be done over here. Or simply decline or reject whatever they're giving it to you as part of your fee dependency or gifts and hospitality, all of these things, right? So with this, we are done with the topic of threats, independent, your threats, principles and safeguards. That's done. Now only we are left with two small topics. One is conflict of interest and another is engagement letter, and then we'll be done with this particular chapter. So let's meet in the next video to talk about them. Hi guys, let's start with our next threat, which is a self-review threat. Till now, we have done self-interest. We are already done with familiarity as well. Now, the third risk or third threat, not a risk, I'm sorry, a threat is your self-review threat. As in the initial lecture, I have already explained to you or given you a brief as to what is a self-review threat. As the name suggests, I am reviewing my own self. That is the basic meaning of self-review threat, wherein you are reviewing your own self and your own work, basically. So in auditor's terminology, if for example the auditor is preparing the financial statements and they are only reviewing the financial statements, that does not make any sense, because the auditor will either dismiss his or her own mistake, or might be ignorant of the same, or might be thinking that might be a situation that they're not performing the quality work because they believe on their in their self, and they think that this work has been done by me, so there won't be any issues in the financial statement. So ultimately, they take it a little leniently. So if I read the definition for you, the auditor doing work on clients' books and then auditing the same books, which is basically making the financial statements or something else, which basically they are doing the work and then same work is being audited by them. This can lead to the auditor might miss errors on their own work or be reluctant to admit them, of course, because nobody, like if somebody tells me that, hey, listen, you have done this mistake, even I will be reluctant that no, this is absolutely fine. This is absolutely fine. Of course, we all are like that. We are humans. So that is a basic human nature, that we will be very reluctant of admitting to our mistakes if we are able to find the same, right? So that is what is self-review threat. If I give you a real life example for the same, I think I gave you in the initial lecture also, is regarding supposingly you appeared for a mock test. All right, mock test. And supposedly I gave you the test, but you were, because of some reasons, you were not able to appear for the test. So you said, ma'am, can you please help me? Then I come on board and I write the answers on your behalf, or I do the test on your behalf, or something on those lines. Do you think when I am evaluating, when I'm checking your test, will I take it with more seriously? I won't, because I know that I only have performed the test, so there won't be any mistakes. But there can be mistakes, and this is a huge problem, that I cannot do the test on your behalf, because your duty is to appear for the test and my duty is to review the test. My duty is not to perform the test, right? So it is about the duties and the responsibilities also, plus it is about the quality of the work as well, which gets impacted because of self-review threat, right? So now couple of examples that let's discuss them. Mind you guys, again, similar to the other threats that we have already discussed, self-interest and familiarity threat, self-review is also very important for your OTQs, as well as it is also important for your case-based questions, because it can come as a 3 to 5 marker as a case-based scenario also, wherein they have given you the case and they ask you to write the threats and the relevant safeguards. It's a quality management question which can come for 3 to 5 marks in your question number 1 of section B. So I hope that you are able to understand these, because again, these are not tricky at all. You just need to understand with the concepts. Don't learn anything. Whatever here it is written, you need to first understand the concepts from the baseline, right? And then you need to learn some of the keywords via which you can probably write in the exam as well, or you can identify the particular threat from the exam, from the case scenario itself, right? So the first example that I have for you is accounting and bookkeeping services. So basically, what do we understand by accounting and bookkeeping services? When I'm making the financial statements, I'm making the trading account, the P&L account, the balance sheet, all of these are being made by me. The journal entries, the ledger accounts, all of these I, as an auditor, I am doing all of these tasks, I am doing all of these work. So now let us bifurcate if the client is not non-listed and if the client is listed. So if the client is not listed, then you can probably provide them with these services, provided they are of routine nature and they are, they are routine in nature. Basically, there's no extraordinary service that you are providing. Also, you're the person who is the auditor or is working on that particular client as the auditor, they cannot do the accounting or bookkeeping services. So now this is a very common safeguard for other examples also that is coming along your way. But let me explain you with a quick example also. For example, there is a company which is known as XYZ Limited, right? And you are ABC Limited, and you have, as I told you in the previous cases also, that a particular audit firm has couple of different teams that they cater to different clients, right? Supposedly there is a team 1, there's a team 2, there's a team 3. Supposedly team 1 is working on the audit of XYZ client. Now XYZ comes to ABC company and they say, can you also please provide us with the accounting and bookkeeping services also? And it is a not non-listed client, right? So you say, absolutely, yes, we can provide it. Why would you lose out your business? Of course you won't, right? So you will say, you will not ask team A to, like, team 1 to perform the same service. Team 1 is for the audit. Probably you will appoint team 2 to do the accounting and bookkeeping services. So this is basically a safeguard which is common for other examples also, that the same team who is auditing the same client will not provide the not or non-audit services. The teams would be separate. Audit team is separate. Accounting and bookkeeping team is separate. And if it is a listed client, it's a straight no. It's a straight ban. You cannot do it for a listed client. Even with separate engagement teams, you cannot do it. It's a straight ban. All right. So this is the first example. Second example is internal audit services. So we are going to talk about internal audit, external audit in little brief in the next chapters. But you people all I would assume know what is external audit. External audit basically is when a third party is coming to your own company and is reviewing your work. Internal audit is when people or auditors of your own team, own company are reviewing the work so that they ensure that whatever work the company is doing is absolutely working perfectly, so that in the eyes of the external auditor, the company is perfect. Let me again give you an example for internal audit services so that you understand the work at least, right? Supposedly, you are the child, right? You have two guardians. One is your tutor and one is your school teacher, right? And now your final exams are coming on your way. So your final exams are coming your way, right? So whatever the tutor, your tuition teacher is going to review or check or teach you, that is part of internal audit. She is going to take your own test. She is going to have her own test. She is going to review, take your mock test, take your viva, etc. So she is working as an internal audit so that you are very well prepared and you know all the concepts, you have done enough practice so that you can show to your school teacher that, hey, listen, I am the perfect child. I am the topper. I am scoring so good, because you have already done all of the mistakes in front of your tutor, right? So when you are taking the classes at Being SSA also, we also take your mocks, your test series, etc. So we are also preparing you for the final audit, which is basically a final exam. We are doing the interim or the internal audit. I am checking your mocks internally. These marks are not going to count anywhere. This is for your practice to make sure that you are working fine. You know all the concepts. Similarly, the internal auditor of a particular company is going to review the financial statements, is going to check the internal controls, everything, to make sure everything is seamless, everything is perfect. And then when it goes to the review to the external auditor, everything is perfect. And the external auditor is not the one who is taking out the mistakes of the company, right? Because it creates a reputational issue for obvious reasons. You would also not want to make mistakes in the final exam, but make mistake in the mocks and tests that I provide to you for obvious reasons, right? So that is the basic meaning of internal audit services. So now let's compare to our listed and non-listed, whether it is acceptable or no. Internal audit work adds to management's control, but the auditor must not take the management's responsibility for obvious reasons. So if you as an auditor, you want to provide these services, you do not have to take management's responsibility, because auditor responsibility and management responsibility, these are two different things, right? So for non-listed clients, again, this is allowed, provided that the professionals who are working on the audit team are separate from the professionals who are working on the non-audit services, which is basically your internal audit services. And for the listed client, it is not at all allowed. Listed clients have to have a separate internal audit department who are not the auditors, right? So accounting and bookkeeping services for listed clients, it's not allowed, even for the internal audit services. For your non-listed clients, it is allowed, provided that you have separate engagement teams, right? Okay. Now the next one is related to your tax related services. This portion, guys, I know a lot of people do tend to get confused, because I have an experience with the students from last 3.5 years, and a lot of people, when they're appearing for their OTQs, they get stuck in these tax related services where they're not able to identify whether this should be done or not should be done, etc. What tax services you are allowed to cater to, and what tax services you are not allowed to be catered to. So I have made this table, so that this table, with this table, you'll be able to better understand the same things. And it is, whenever we are doing anything in tabular form, I personally believe that, you are able to better understand. So they made this table, and this table contains everything in regards to your tax related services that are being part of your, can be a threat for the auditor. All right. The first of all, let's discuss the overview. Then we'll discuss the examples of tax services which can be provided. The first one is tax overview. Payment for tax work can be done if independent is perceived. So I have written allowed and not allowed over here. So when it is allowed, when your independence, objectivity is maintained, when there is no threat, when there are separate teams probably, that is where it is allowed. It is absolutely okay. But when your objectivity, your independence, your integrity is compromised, or it is leading to any kind of threats, be it advocacy, be it self-review, self-interest, intimidation, familiarity, any of these 5 threats, if it is leading to that or can potentially lead to that, then it is a straight no. It is not at all allowed. Right. So again, now let's deep dive into some of the examples. So there are mainly 3 types of services. They of course have their subtypes, but mainly there are 3 type of services. The first one is tax return preparation services. Now in this particular service, whether it is a listed client or it is a non-listed client, it is absolutely allowed. There's no problem if the auditor is filing the tax return, or not filing, actually preparing the tax return for the client, because there are 2 reasons to it. One reason is that it is always based on historical information, the past information, right? Because when I am right now, I'm currently sitting at a particular month, I will be filing my tax return for the previous year, right? Whatever doings I have done in the previous year, I'll be following the tax, or I will be filing the tax for that particular year. So that is a historical information. I, as an auditor, I cannot change, or the management also cannot change the historical financial information. So that's the first point, that why it is allowed. Second point, why it is allowed, because ultimately once you file or you prepare the return, you submit it to the tax authorities, and then the tax authorities review the work, review all of the numbers, the calculations, etc., and then they make their own decision. So it is ultimately, you are not the final reviewer of the same thing. There is a tax authority who is going to review it. So that is because of these 2 reasons, whether it is a listed, whether it is a non-listed client, it is absolutely allowed to do tax return preparation. Usually allowed, returns based on historical information. That's the first point, why it is allowed. Final approval tests rest with the tax authority. This is the second point. But if this thing is in 90% of the cases, it is allowed, you don't have any problem. But if it is leading to any kind of issues, if it is leading in any kind of threats for the auditor, that is where you have to draw the line, you have to stop. You cannot provide those services. So this is very rare. This is probably 10% of the times, but this happens 90% of the time. So in the exam, if this particular portion comes that is tax return preparation allowed, like in the OTQ, something in relation to this comes, you will say, yes, it is allowed. And like either it is a listed client or a non-listed client, it is allowed. Right? Now, the second one is basically your tax return calculation. When you are calculating the tax calculations for the accounting entries, so you are doing the tax calculation now. So now for listed clients, it is an absolute no. With safeguards, without safeguards, we are not concerned. It is for listed clients, it is absolutely banned. You cannot do it. You cannot calculate the tax for them. It is management's duty to calculate it for you. But if it is a non-listed client, you can do it. And the safeguard is that we just now discussed, that you have to have separate teams. The people who are doing the audit, they are not the people who are calculating the tax for the accounting entries. They are separate teams. So listed, absolutely no. Non-listed, yes, but with safeguards. So if you see, allowed for non-listed clients if done by non-audit team professionals with review by independent reviewer also. So yes, once engagement teams are different, that's the first safeguard. Second safeguard is you also have to have an independent reviewer who is an external party, just like your EQR. Engagement quality reviewer who is independent and who does not have to have anything to do with this engagement. Forbidden for listed clients to have prepare the same tax calculations of current and deferred, because this is we are talking about current and deferred tax. We are not talking about the historical information. That is the reason this was allowed, because right now we are making the returns to the income tax authorities. Here we are just calculating the tax for the current and deferred tax. So because this is current financial statements for listed clients, it's not allowed, right? The third type of activity that is done under tax services, tax bracket, tax umbrella, is tax planning and advisory services. So now this is also allowed, whether it is a listed company, whether it is a non-listed company, but you again need to have different teams, and you need to ensure as a safeguard that there is no problem on your objectivity, integrity, independence. All of these are not getting impacted because of the work that you are doing as part of tax planning and advisory services. So it is allowed for listed, for non-listed, but safeguards have to be applied. And in cases if you feel that it is going to impact the company's effectiveness, or it is going to lead to any kind of threats or a problem, then you simply have to withdraw from that. Allowed if subjectivity is manageable, practice is established or supported, material effect on financial statement is considered. Not allowed if effectiveness depends on particular accounting treatment. So these three are major examples. Like there are three services majorly that can be tested in your exam. One is tax return preparation, another one is tax calculation, and the third one is tax planning and advisory services. And then there are few of the subheadings for these only. Let's discuss those as well. Tax planning, again, within tax planning, you can have guidance with potential impact on financial statements. So again, it is allowed if the safeguards are in place. If safeguards are not in place and it is getting impacted, your independence, objectivity is getting impacted, simply withdraw. Simple. Then we have the next one is assistance in resolving tax disputes. Again, here, see, this can potentially look like an advocacy threat, right? So again, in cases, if you feel that it can lead to an advocacy threat, simply withdraw. But if it does not hamper if with safeguards, you can mitigate this, the advocacy threat, then you can probably do this as well, right? Non-audit client who should do the work. So this is basically who should be doing the work for the listed and non-listed clients. So for non-listed clients, professionals professional not on the audit team will do the tax work. Independent review will check, which I told you earlier. And for the listed clients, generally the tax services that pose independence risk are restricted, and some advisory roles may be allowed with safeguards. So again, as student, as when you are giving your exam, from exam perspective, you have to remember for non-audit clients, non-listed clients, usually the tax services are allowed, but with two safeguards. One is that you need to have two separate or the teams should be separate with an independent reviewer. These are the two safeguards. For listed clients, it is allowed to some extent, and where it is impacting your independence, your subjectivity, it's completely banned. But in cases you can do it with some safeguards, it is allowed. So mainly in exam, I have seen these three cases coming into place. So remember these really very, very well, right? So this was about your tax services in relation to your self-review thread. Now, few more examples can be other services, basically IT services, valuation services, corporate finance, legal services, temporary personal assignment, client staff joins audit team. So again, IT services can be provided with safeguards if it is not impacting subjectivity. So these are all the other activities which can be done if they are not impacting your subjectivity and your basically subjectivity, your objectiveness and your integrity for the same reason, and it is not creating any sort of threats for the auditor, right? So this is again some of the other services that you could probably provide to them, right? So with this, we are done with the review, self-review thread also. I hope that you have understood this really, really very nicely. Now we'll be moving forward with the next thread, which is in relation to your advocacy and intimidation. Guys, please let me know in case you have any doubts, any questions on the WhatsApp group. I'll be more than happy to assist you with those. Once we are done with the threads, we're also going to solve the questions which will be available to you on the portal.